Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's our Wheel and Anchor Future Travel Forum for 2022, Part 3. And I'm very excited to be talking about Southeast Asia with you this morning on our webinar. I'm very excited that we have members from all across Canada who joined us today. So we've got a lot to cover. So without further ado, we're going to just launch right into it. For those of you who are new to us, good morning, by the way, to all of those. It's great to have so many repeat visitors on our webinars. I really love to see you and love your enthusiasm in participating. So good morning, Fran and Whitby. Good morning, Diane and Kelowna. Good morning, John in Niagara Falls. And good morning to everyone. So on that note, consider yourself welcomed. Wheel and Anchor is all about bringing travelers together. This is our mantra. This is the vision when we set this up a few years back. We know how much fun it is to travel, and it's even more fun when you do it with like-minded people, with people who have the same aspirations and the same sense of adventure when they're on the road. And when you put those people together, we just have a lot of fun. And not just fun, but we also have, I find that we have a more enriching experience. And that's what differentiates us from so many of the other travel companies out there. My personal mission for everybody is that we all become well-traveled and well-connected. So what does that mean? Well-traveled is, for some people, it's just about, ticking off the bucket list, ticking off the number of countries traveled. Let's face it, most of us do it. I certainly do it. But for me, well-traveled is really gaining a broader understanding of people from around the world and becoming connected, not only to our fellow travelers, but to the people that we meet along the way. And I know for sure that the friendships and the connections that have been fostered over the years have really, they really enrich our lives. And so that's my goal for all of you. So joining me on our webinar this morning is our team, which is myself. I'm Gordon, founder of Wheel and Anchor. I'm joined by Joel, who is our co-founder and provides our technical support. So make sure everything goes according to plan. And of course, Paula Zarnick, who is our senior trip specialist. And if you have called our office before, you'll probably spoken to Paula on the phone. And she's actually spent quite a bit of time in Asia herself. So all of us have a lot of knowledge about Asia to bring to the table. This is our neck of the woods, if you will. So the plan today, all of us, me, you, everyone, wondering when we can get back to traveling. So this is one way that we are sort of passing the time, is to look at how we're going to travel post-pandemic and start to formulate some plans. I'm in the same boat. I'm here stuck, if you will, in Thailand, anxious to get back on the road with all of you. We're looking at Southeast Asia and some of the ideas that we have inside this new concept of travel. So I want to take a moment or two to ask you, first of all, please give us feedback. So you have the chat button there at the end of the webinar. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through, first of all, I'm going to explain this 5x5 concept. So bear with us if you have already been through some of our other webinars. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to explain what that is all about. And then we are going to go through some of the destinations. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session. But I'm going to be asking questions of you as well, because I'd love to get your feedback. So on to 5x5. So this is a concept that we first mentioned in our inaugural Future Travel Forum that happened about a month ago. And we spent a lot of time thinking about travel, what travel is going to look like when we can get back to traveling again. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from our members, some of the comments that I've gotten from other colleagues in the industry were that, the way we travel is likely to change. Certainly in the short term, we're going to be faced with having to mitigate all possible risks of contracting this virus. and any other ones that may come up along. And so what is likely to mean is that we're going to be taking fewer trips by plane. And if you saw my newsletter from last week as well, you will have noted that the airline industry is really facing a very, very challenging future. And I speculated there, based on some research that I'd done, that it's very likely that airfares are going to have to go up, simply because there's going to be there's just going to be a lot less routes and a lot less demand for air travel. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. But the point being is that we established that people are going to be more mindful about moving around in groups. We're going to be certainly mindful about crowds in places. And I think, and based already on how we have operated a lot of our trips at Wheel and Anchor, is that I think that there's going to be a growing desire to spend more time, to take more time. We already build that into a lot of our trips. We try to spend 3 or 4 nights at important destinations rather than bouncing around a night here, a night there. But I think that even more time, because time is going to allow us to choose where we go and how we do it. It's going to allow for more free time, and it's going to allow us to just be a little bit more present, a little bit more mindful, and also, where possible, avoid larger crowds of people. And I think that's going to be very, very important in the short term. So in taking all of that into account, what is 5x5? So the idea behind 5x5 is that I've established, we've sort of thought through the idea that spending 5 nights at any given destination is really an optimal time to really feel like you've gotten in and gotten to know a place, right? So many trips are built around spending just a day. If you're on a cruise somewhere, you arrive in the morning, you leave in the evening. I mean, you've got a whirlwind tour. And even more conventional travel, overland travel by highway coach, often the stops are a night or two. And you so often you think, my God, where was I last Thursday? And go back to the itinerary and check. By spending 5 nights in a destination, you can simply take the time to explore it on your own, with guidance, of course, from our host, from our local guides, from the people that we work with on the ground. But again, the flexibility to have time to see the things that you want to see at the pace that you want to see them. So, and the other 5 is having 5 stops in an itinerary. And of course, that's not mandatory. That's not mandatory in this concept that we're proposing. What we're suggesting is that you we would propose a itinerary with 5 stops of 5 nights, would be 25 nights. But you could join or depart at any one of those places. So you could do just 2 stops. If you only had time for a 10-day trip, you could go over to Europe, let's say, and do 2 5-night stops in two concurrent cities, or you could do 3 or 4 or 5 or all of them. And so the idea here as well is that we would be looking at maintaining our stance with smaller groups. In some cases, they might even be smaller than normal. We might even be 8 or 10 people in any one place, depending on the appetite, the demand for that particular stop. So this idea of 5x5, we've gotten actually a lot of positive feedback from it in regards to our European programs that we introduced over the last few weeks. So I'm curious to see. Asia's a little bit different. It's further afield, but when we pulled this program together, we actually we looked at it in a number of different ways, and we decided we're going to present it as if it was one long program. So we're going to plot a little journey through Southeast Asia, 5 nights in each place, in most of the places. And the idea here that you need to keep in mind is that you don't need to do the whole thing. You could literally come for just a couple of weeks and visit 2 or 3 of the stops. Because you might say, oh, well, I've already been to Vietnam, but I'd really like to see, Laos and Cambodia, or I'd really love to see Indonesia with Bali, for example. So that's the idea here. In the end, I'm going to ask for your feedback because, again, it's important to me to understand what is your perception of Asia and where are the places that you would like to visit. because that's obviously what we want to focus on. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. So we are focusing here on Southeast Asia. The only exception will be Taiwan, which I've put in at the end as Taiwan is likely to be one of our gateway cities. And I think that Taiwan, anyway, I'll go into Taiwan a little bit later at the end, but I think it is one of these somewhat underrated destinations. And now with all the troubles that Hong Kong is facing, I think that Taipei makes an ideal gateway to Southeast Asia. So irrespective of that, we are looking at the classic Southeast Asian countries of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Singapore, and Indonesia. So that's what we've got included here today. That is by no means comprehensive. There are other countries here that we could visit, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on in today's presentation. Okay, so the program would start off in Ho Chi Minh City, which is the sort of commercial, the principal commercial city of Vietnam, also known as, formerly known as Saigon, as some of you will know. And so I'll take a moment here and explain the layout of an average 5-day stay as it relates to Ho Chi Minh City particularly, just so you get a concept for it. So you would fly in, and on your arrival day, as per our normal programs, you'd be met at the airport, picked up, brought to the hotel, and that's the point when we would meet the group. And depending on the time of day, depending on the flight schedules and so on, we would either hold an orientation tour that day, or we would do it first thing the following day. With Asia, because it's such a long flight, I generally don't like to program anything the first day, because by the time you arrive, whether it's noon or whether it's 10 at night or whatever it happens to be, you're going to be exhausted, because let's face it, it's a long journey. So with Ho Chi Minh City, like pretty much all of the cities in Asia, there are some wonderful walkable components to it. And it's important that, and Ho Chi Minh is a very bustling city. I remember the first time I went to Vietnam, which was way back in 1994, so over 25 years ago. And at that time, it wasn't scooters that everybody was riding, like you see in the picture. Everybody was riding bicycles. So the country, the city has evolved so much in the last 25 years that, back then, and that was, let's face it, that was the early 90s, but it looked like, from a European perspective, it looked like the 1940s or the 1930s. I mean, it was remarkable. And these cities like Ho Chi Minh have so many wonderful quarters, neighborhoods, and districts that you can just amble around in. And the people are so friendly in Vietnam. So in any event, our average 5-day program, our typical 5-day program, will start with an orientation tour. And the idea here is that it gives you a flavor of what there is to see in a place like Ho Chi Minh City. Because with every 5-day segment, we'll have at least 2 full days on your own. Now, when we say on your own, does that mean we're just, we're going to leave you completely to your own devices? No, absolutely not. The idea of on your own time is that you will have done your own research in advance. You'll have consulted with us in a little bit in advance, or you won't have done any preparation in advance. And you'll simply talk to us and our local partners there when you get there and say, I'm really keen on going to explore, where should I go? And we're going to point you in the right direction, and we're going to make sure that you get to the particular place that you want to go. Often what we find is that people end up gravitating together with other people who want to do the same kind of things. And that's what we usually facilitate on the sort of the first night, is the meet and greet, a little cocktail party. And it's like, hey, I'm planning to go up and see this, monument somewhere on this hill or something like that. And I'd love to see that too. And so this is what we try to foster at Wheel and Anchor is this pulling people together that have the same interests, and then facilitating that they can go off and see the things that they want to see. So Vietnam, as you may know, French colony for a long time. So you see a lot of influences still today. I mean, despite everything that they went through in the Vietnam War, and all of the things that have transpired in this country, which is still communist, by the way. Vietnam is still a communist country. But the hustle bustle of it makes it feel more like, you know, a city in China or a city or Hong Kong or something like that. And so we will take you to see some of the main sites when we do our orientation tour. But when we go off, and so on our any given 5-day program, we'll probably spend at least a full day or 2 days seeing some of the things in the environs around the city. And in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, you can't go there and not see the Cu Chi tunnels. There are many, many things, many memorials and places where you can hear about the Vietnam War. And interestingly, in Vietnam, they don't call it the Vietnam War, they call it the American War. And I won't go into that, but you can sort of probably understand why. The Cu Chi tunnels, which are about an hour outside of town, are basically the tunnel system that was built by the Viet Cong, which was one of the reasons that they actually succeeded, that they won the war, was because they were able, through this network of hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, to evade the American soldiers. So it's an incredible thing to watch. If you're claustrophobic, you might not want to crawl through too many of these tunnels, because you realize that they were built for the Vietnamese, let's say, average body type. And as Westerners, we're a little bit larger than that on average. But it's a fascinating place to visit. It's for me, perhaps one of the most memorable parts of Vietnam that I recall going to. We'll spend another day visiting the Mekong Delta. And of course, Ho Chi Minh is where the mighty Mekong River enters the South China Sea. And you get an incredible sense of life on the river, because the Mekong is still an integral part of Vietnamese transportation system, not just for Vietnam, but for actually all of the countries that the Mekong goes through. So it is really, really quite fascinating. We'll take a sampan ride, and we'll get a flavor for the Mekong and its significance in Vietnam. And so that's it gives you an example, as I say. So we'll have full day tours. We'll have 2 days where you can go off and see a whole, you'll spend 5 days in Ho Chi Minh, and you'll think you need to spend 2 weeks there, because the city is so rich and so many things to see. Anyway, in any event, so I won't go in as much detail on every single city, but I want to give you an idea of what it's about and what there is to see. So we'll fly from Ho Chi Minh, which is down in the south part of Vietnam, all the way up to Hanoi. And Hanoi, of course, is the capital of Vietnam, and was at the time, obviously, the capital of North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, or as the Vietnamese call it, the American War. And Hanoi has a very different feel to it, because it is the seat of the Communist Party. You feel like, the law and order, right? It's like, for those of you who might have traveled to China, it's like comparing Beijing to Shanghai, is like Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City. It has a wonderful, wonderful old town quarter, which is where I spend a lot of the time walking around, and we'll sort of do an orientation around there. And Hanoi is also known as a city because it has so many lakes to it. So it's like everywhere you can walk 20, 30 minutes and you'll discover another lake. Again, a beautiful city to just take in sort of at your own pace. But there's two things that one ought to do when one is up in the northern part of Vietnam. One of them is well known, and the other one less so. I'll talk about the less known one, which is Ninh Binh, or Ninh Binh is the way they pronounce it properly. Ninh Binh is a part of the Van Long Nature Reserve. It is an incredible scenic area of these limestone cliffs that, just like the picture shows here, covered in lush vegetation, these white mountains that come out. And it's like Halong Bay, which is the more famous thing in northern Vietnam, but on land. So it is really one of the most scenic places that you can visit, certainly in Vietnam, if not all of Southeast Asia. We'll spend time here touring through the rice fields and getting a sense of the countryside in Vietnam. But the other thing we'll do, and so our second stop of Hanoi will actually be a 4+1. So it'll be 4 nights in the city of Hanoi, but you can't, as far as I'm concerned, visit Hanoi in North Vietnam without going to Halong Bay. And as far as, how should we say, ocean landscapes, if you will, is concerned, this is one of the most beautiful places I have ever visited, ever. It still stands out for me as one of my favorite places. And Halong Bay is, again, these same limestone cliffs, but instead of being on land, they come out of the ocean. So you get a sense of it from the picture. You get these pyramids, or not pyramids, these columns of rock that extend out of the ocean and are absolutely magnificent. And there's hundreds of them. So we will, the plan is for this part of Vietnam is that we'll go by seaplane from Hanoi to Halong Bay, which gives you a chance to view the bay and all of these amazing islands from the air. We'll spend a night on a beautiful ship, cruising around, seeing the fishermen as they come up. I remember, fishermen would come up beside the boat. We bought some fish, and then the chef on the boat, cooked the fresh seafood. An amazing experience. The color of the water, everything else, everything about it is really, truly amazing. So if you haven't heard of Halong Bay, after the webinar, Google it, look at the pictures. It is absolutely amazing. So that is how we would spend our last night. So we would do a bit differently than our typical 5 nights, where we do 5 nights in a destination. But I think you can't come up to this region without spending a couple of days and 1 night in Halong Bay. So from here, we'll have covered the major sites in Vietnam. So much more to see in Vietnam, but we're going to proceed then by air to Laos. And so the city in Laos that I've selected for this itinerary is called Luang Prabang. So if you're not that familiar with Asian geography, you may not have heard of Luang Prabang. It's not the capital of Laos. It's actually the second largest city. The capital is Vientiane in the south, which we didn't put in the program because, frankly, it's not that interesting. I went to Vientiane before, and some people might argue with me, but it was not one of the ones that stood out. Luang Prabang, on the other hand, which is a UNESCO designated town, and rightly so, is truly amazing. Also sits on the Mekong River, but of course much further upstream than Ho Chi Minh. And it is adorned with an incredible number of amazing monasteries and temples. And the experience here, because it's not just about the sites that you see, but Luang Prabang is known for the monasteries and particularly the monks. And my own experiences there, which is something we definitely would do, was to take part in the alms to the monks ceremony, which happens at sunrise in the morning. You have to get up bright and early. And all of these monks in, typically orange, but they have other colored outfits as well, will come out and they gather food from the people in the community, which is basically how they feed themselves. It's all by donation. It's called giving alms to the monks. And as the monks pass by, they sort of bless you and they sort of give a little prayer, and then you give them a donation of food. And it is an incredibly warming experience to be part of this ritual, this ceremony that goes on every single day and has for, decades and centuries. So that's, for me, a highlight of Luang Prabang. We'll also get out to this countryside, which is undulating hills. And we'll visit a living land farm where you get a sense of the manual techniques that are still in place for growing rice, as well as other agricultural products from the region. And this is, again, one thing that you'll see all across Asia is the dichotomy between rural life and urban life. The urban life in Asia, in the big cities, is very much like it is in the Western world. But the urban life, the rural life, on the other hand, when you get out into the countryside and you see all of these people out working the fields, something that we don't really do anymore in North America because everything is mechanized. So I think that's very important. We'll spend also half a day doing a Laotian cooking course. And part of the experience of Asia as well is about the cuisine. And it's remarkable how the cuisines, they have their similarities from country to country, but they also have some very different and unique flavors. And so taking part in a Laotian cooking course would be definitely something we would do. And on our free days, and again, here is the benefit, because I know there's some active members in our group, and so we would definitely organize, some hikes. Here you can go up Puzi Mountain, which I'm not sure if it's the one in the background where the sun is in this photograph, but it's one of these places where you can climb up. It's not an arduous thing. It takes maybe an hour to walk up to the top, and you get a beautiful view over the Mekong River, over Luang Prabang. So in almost every stop, we have an opportunity where we can offer a slightly more active program on the leisure day. But for those who are, less interested in that, we can have a cultural program or historical program or what have you. We can go zip lining here as well. Anyway, that's another long story I'm not going to get into now. So that'll be our 5 days in Luang Prabang. And I think it is the highlight and probably the most interesting part of Laos. From here, we would fly down to Siem Reap in Cambodia. And here's the other interesting thing about Asia. There are amazing air connections between all these cities that you may or may not have heard of. And so we can bounce around to these different places relatively easily because there's great and reliable air connections. So Siem Reap is, again, not the biggest city in Cambodia, but rather probably the second biggest city, but undoubtedly the tourist mecca, if you will. And the reason being is that Siem Reap is home to Angkor Wat and the whole Angkor archaeological park. And so I think it's worth, a lot of people, again, most trips will come to Siem Reap specifically to do Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom and the major temples, which you can cover in a day or two. And so they'll be in for a couple of nights and then out again. But there is much more to the city and the surrounding area than that. So over the course of 5 nights, undoubtedly, we would take a day, probably 2 days, to visit certainly Angkor Wat, which is, of course, the largest religious monument in the world. Because it is so significant and you've all heard of it before, it is a busy place. But, we have the benefit of time that we can choose, the day, the time of day that we want to go to try to avoid some of the crowds. But you can't go to Cambodia or this part of Asia and not see Angkor Wat. That being said, when I was there the last time, and again, we would probably organize this on one of our leisure days, is that we did part of these temples by mountain bike. And we can definitely set it up so that you can bike as much as you're comfortable. And then when it gets to be too much, you just hop in the back of a truck. And the reason that you do this is because for a couple of reasons. First of all, by taking a bike through these non-automobile infested roads, but you can take the back way and go through the little villages and really get a flavor for Cambodian life, rural life. That for me was the part that was particularly amazing. But you can also go around to the back door, if you will. These temples all have a back door. And that enables you to go in and see a side of the temple, a side of the complex that is not overrun by tourists. You can also get to some of the other temples and ruins. So there are hundreds and hundreds of ruins of temples that are in, some of them are incredibly well preserved, like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, some of them less so, but all of them have a certain appeal and a certain flavor to them. The other thing that we would do in Siem Reap, because again, we've got 5 nights here, and there's only so many temples you can take on any tour, but we're going to go and see Tonle Sap. And so Tonle Sap is actually the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. But this lake is, the level of this lake depends on the season. And so what's interesting about Tonle Sap is that in the wet season, there's many villages like you see in the picture here, where the houses are all up on stilts because the only way to get around is by boat. And then in the dry season, the waters recede from a lot of these coastal seashore towns, and they're on the dry. So I've seen them both wet and dry. And depending on exactly the time of the year that we would go, and we would go at an optimal time of the year, but not peak season, you get a chance to see and visit some of these villages where, people live in these circumstances where they're completely, they're on stilts over the water. So Tonle Sap is a fascinating place to visit. and most often skipped because people come to Siem Reap mostly just to see the Angkor Archaeological Park. So 5 nights in Siem Reap. We'll then fly down and visit the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh. Once again, Phnom Penh is often skipped because people will go and they'll do Vietnam, and then they'll make a quick jump to Siem Reap, and then they'll head to Bangkok in Thailand. But Phnom Penh is a very interesting capital city. I mean, they call it the Pearl of Asia for some very good reasons. It has some magnificent architectural structures, most notably the Royal Palace and the Silver Pagoda that have been restored to, to incredible levels. But Phnom Penh, a lot of us, when we think about Cambodia, we think about all of the years when they were at civil war and the Khmer Rouge and so on. And it's important for us to understand a bit about that history and the atrocities that went on. So, you can't go to Phnom Penh, which we will definitely do, without visiting the killing fields, where literally tens of thousands of people were, it was a genocide, much like other genocides in other parts of the world. And it's very sobering, but I think, I'm a firm believer, and I know a lot of our members share the same belief that, witnessing and seeing these kinds of places is just as important part as having the fun along the way. We'll also head out to Kodak, which is a silk island, where you see not just silk, but a tremendous number of artisans doing wood carving and pottery and amazing silk designs. This is one of those special places where you get to see and interact with the people in action. And that's, once again, a particularly enlightening part of visiting a place like Cambodia and specifically the capital city. Jean makes an interesting comment here about she still gets depressed when she thinks about the visit. Yeah, for sure. It is very depressing. It is very sobering. And yet, for that reason, that we never forget all the things that went on, it's important that we see these kinds of things. And Cambodian cuisine as well will be on the menu. Hopefully, the red tree ants, which is one of their most famous dishes, tree ants stir-fried with beef and basil. And it's good, believe me. It's we'll visit more than one market where you'll be able to try insects. And I always encourage you to try. Often they just taste like basically French fries anyway. In any event, we'll have spent 5 days in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, and then head off to the grand city of Bangkok. So this is getting closer to home to me. Bangkok hardly needs any introduction. It has many sides to it, and not just the side that people will recall from the Hangover movie, for those of you that watch it. There is that side. Bangkok has its, how shall we say, dark side is maybe the wrong way to put it, but it has a very edgy, colorful side to it. But it also has some incredible monuments. In particular, of course, the Grand Palace, as well as Wat Po, which is one of the largest temples with a giant reclining Buddha in it. And so Bangkok is a city that, once again, is perfect for leisure time because it has an amazing subway system. You can get to all kinds of different places in the downtown, but you can also just walk through the neighborhoods of Sukhumvit and Sathorn and along the riverside. And it's a big, huge, sprawling city. While we're there, we'll definitely go out to the floating markets at Dam Choi, which is about an hour and a half outside of town, but well worth it. It's a little bit touristy, but at the same time, my experience has been, when I've been there with guests, is that you just can't help but get caught up in this excitement of all of these merchants on boats and going around and buying various little trinkets and all. The experience of it is really like no other place. I mean, they're not unique to Thailand, but certainly the way it's set up here, the hustle bustle of everything happening on the rivers and canals that form Bangkok is really quite amazing. And talking about history and important events, we'll also make a trip out to Kanchanaburi, which is where the River Kwai is, or what is now known as the River Kwai, and the famous bridge over the River Kwai, which doesn't actually exist, at least not the one that was referred to in the original book and the ensuing screenplays. But again, the history here of all of the events that transpired in that era and around that time are very, very important. And frankly, the drive out there is absolutely wonderful. So we've got a couple of great, interesting days filled up in Bangkok, but still lots of time to visit the city and to enjoy the hotels, because we'll stay in, one of my favorite hotels in Bangkok, undoubtedly, and they have wonderful hotels with skyscrapers and rooftop patios, and it has a truly amazing skyline. So we'll have a wonderful time in Bangkok, and from Bangkok we'll head to Thailand's second most famous city, which is Chiang Mai. And Thailand has a lot of cities that are very significant in the evolution of Siam, which was what Thailand, of course, was called before. But Chiang Mai is particularly interesting because the center of the city is basically like a quadrant surrounded by a moat, like 4 equal length canals that surround the inner city of Chiang Mai, where you'll find a concentration of temples and stupas and other religious structures like you'll hardly find anywhere else. And so that's the beauty of this city, is that you can wander around and explore Chiang Mai all on your own, and taking as much or as little time to see each of these temples, not to the temples themselves, but of course, the monks and so on who reside in them. So it's a fascinating town. It's in the hilly countryside of northern Thailand, the northwestern part of the country. And so out here, it's also known for the wildlife. So one of the things that we will do is visit an elephant sanctuary. And, the whole business of elephants is very controversial because, of course, in Thailand, as in other countries in Southeast Asia, elephants were, and to some extent are still used as, work animals. But in this particular sanctuary, they actually rescue them, and you can look after them, you can wash them, you can feed them. And it's all done in a way that is super, super, how should we say, gentle and beneficial for these elephants, many of whom have come are in retirement, so to speak, from their working lives. Another thing they do in Chiang Mai, for example, is they have these tiger farms. These we will not be visiting because, frankly, they don't have a good reputation, and I'll just leave it at that. So we try to be very selective about the things that we do. Just because it's touristy, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And Chiang Mai is also well known for the so-called hill tribes. And up in the hills of Chiang Mai, you'll find the so-called long neck women. And you've probably heard about these before. They're the women who put rings around their neck, and they appear to have, and to some extent have, an elongated neck from childhood on. These actually aren't people from Thailand. They're actually refugees from Myanmar who migrated to Thailand, and by virtue of the last king were given citizenship, given an amnesty, and were allowed to stay in Thailand. And it is important and appropriate to go and see them because, contrary to what a lot of people believe about this whole ritual and this whole tradition is actually voluntary. So nobody is. There was a lot of controversy that these women were forced into this situation, but that is not the case, or it certainly is no longer the case. And it is fascinating to see, again, how these people live, these people who are still refugees in Thailand, and maintain this strong tradition. So that's all up in Chiang Mai. And from here, we will make a nonstop hop down to Singapore. So you'll note as well that we've gone from sort of big city to smaller towns. We have urban, we have rural. You get a real dichotomy of Asia. And Singapore is one of those cities that is absolutely evidence of the extreme urban side of that dichotomy. And, no matter what you've heard about Singapore, it's all of that. And you know, Singapore, of course, is a quasi dictatorship in the sense that it has been run essentially by the same family, the same group for a long time, effectively since its inception, and that means that the city is run like with an iron fist. Not in a, you won't notice it. You'll when you're wandering around the city, it has a vibrancy and you know, an ambiance to it, like Hong Kong, like New York, like London. I mean, it's just hustling and bustling, but it is clean as a whistle. You probably heard that about Singapore as well, right? They put right on it on the little airplane card that you get when you land in Singapore. You know, do not bring chewing gum into the country because it's highly illegal. And so that kind of describes Singapore in a nutshell. We actually allocated 3 nights for Singapore, a little bit shorter than our usual 5-night stay, because Singapore, while it is a must visit and you want to get an impression of it, beyond all the skyscrapers and all the rest of it, there actually isn't so many things to do in Singapore in and of itself, right? It's a city-state sitting at the tip of Malaysia. Across the strait, you have the Malaysian city of Johor Bahru, which is a very industrial city and not really worth a visit. So 3 nights in Singapore gives you a couple of days to go and see some of these iconic buildings, whether it's the Marina Bay Sands or whether it's the historic Raffles Hotel, which of course is home to the Long Bar and the famous Singapore Sling. It'll set you back about $30 for one, but like anywhere, you got to go, you got to try it. It's part of Singapore. They have built some amazing architectural structures and parks. They have this area called the Gardens by the Bay, which is like 500 acres of incredible botanical gardens and artistic sculptures and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we can do we'll have one free day. We'll have one day where we'll go and check everything out that there is to check out in Singapore, including going up on that big boat that sits on top of the 3 skyscrapers, so-called Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. We'll have a marvelous time no matter what. And so this point in the itinerary is a good point to jump on or off. Singapore obviously has good flight connections. You can't fly there direct from Canada, but you can easily make a connection either via the US or via one of the other cities in Asia. And from Singapore, we'll hop down then to Indonesia and we'll check out a city called Yogyakarta. So this may or may not be a place that's known to you. Yogyakarta is one of the larger cities, but not the largest cities. So of course, the capital of Indonesia is Jakarta, but Jakarta is not really, how should we say, touristically favorable. I visited there. I visited, actually, Joel was living in Jakarta at the time, and I recall visiting there, and it is just a massive city without much to actually see if you're a visitor. So we're not going there. Instead, we're going to go to Yogyakarta. And it's in fact the only city in Indonesia that's still ruled by a monarchy, by a special decree that they put into place. And it is the hub of Javanese art. So it sits on the island of Java, as does Jakarta. And you really get, this is the juxtaposition of all the culture that you get specifically from Java, because of course Indonesia has thousands of islands. And many of them have different cultures on them, but Java being one of the biggest one, and Yogyakarta being sort of the hub of all of that. In particular, the Borobudur Palace, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and ranks right up there with Angkor Wat or with Bagan in Myanmar as being one of the most iconic and most important religious sites that you could see in Southeast Asia. Truly, truly incredible. So we'll spend a day there. And again, we'll have the flexibility because we'll have 5 nights here. For those that are a little bit more active and want to climb up, we'll walk part of the way up Mount Merapi, which is a volcano nearby. Indonesia, as you know, sits on the Ring of Fire. Most of the archipelago are volcanic islands. And Mount Merapi on Java is one of them, and it's something we can visit quite easily as a day trip from Yogyakarta. So many things to see here as well. The night performances by all these street dancers and so on in Malioboro. Yogyakarta is a special treat and will really give you some truly memorable cultural experience of Indonesia. From here, we hop down to Bali. And so Bali, while part of Indonesia, is very different. Of course, the majority of Indonesia is Muslim, but Bali, the island of Bali, of course, is Hindu predominantly. And so it is really like an island, and of course it is an island, but in a religious and a cultural sense compared to the rest of Indonesia. It is far and away the most significant tourist destination in Indonesia. So I think more tourists go to Bali than the rest of Indonesia combined. And which is not to say that there's not a lot to see in Indonesia, but it's all sort of far flung. And Bali is truly, truly a special place. So we'll spend 6 nights in Bali. So again, we're going to depart a little bit from the 5x5 concept because Bali is worthy of more time. And the idea for Bali is that we'll divide it up between the east coast and the west coast of Bali. Interestingly, though, we're not going to spend any time in the south of Bali. For those that, for example, see Bali as an ideal place to end the trip, because this is the last stop on this proposed itinerary that we have before Taipei on the way back, you could spend longer. Bali is basically, most people go to Bali to visit the very southern part, the areas like Kuta and Seminyak and so on, which are all very touristy because people go to the beach and they go to party and they do all the rest of it. But the part of Bali that's most interesting is further up near the volcano, near the city of Ubud, which is a truly incredible cultural gem on the island. We'll stay in an area called Cinnamon. So if you can picture rice paddies like you can see the aerial view of in the picture here, and you can see all these wonderful temples that make Bali so famous. The first 3 nights we'll explore some of these, like the Tiashaganga Water Palace and the Taman Ujung Water Palace and the Lotus Temple. We'll get a great cultural insight. And I can't tell you how picturesque the landscape is between the rice paddies and all of these magnificent temples that all seem to have their own unique style to them. So we'll spend 3 nights doing that, and then we'll spend 3 nights doing more of the natural scenery part of Bali. We'll drive all the way across the island, passing the Kintamani volcano. So it's actually a village that's situated on the rim of the volcano, and we'll end up in Menjangan, which is adjacent to the West Valley National Park. And here we get some insight into all of the tropical creatures that you get in Indonesia, like macaques and the wild pigs and monkeys, and so a very different flavor to it. And these areas again are off the beaten track in Bali, and I think that's the important part to see. So by spending 3 nights on the east coast near Ubud and 3 nights on the west coast, adjacent to where the ferry goes across to the island of Java, you get a great feeling for Bali. And again, this would be the last stop before we stop in Taipei for those that wish on the way back. So it's a great opportunity. You could extend by 3-4 days a week, what have you, to explore more of Bali on your own. So that wraps up the main part of the program, keeping in mind, and I want to get your opinion and your thoughts on what I've talked about this morning. You can join or depart at any portion of the tour. You don't have to do all of those cities all in one trip. But given the fact that, I don't know, the future of travel may be that we decide to take less trips by airplane and that we make, a longer trip that has more stops over a longer period of time simply because we want to not take the risk of traveling as frequently. So that's, again, part of the rationale here. So I wanted to mention as well Taiwan. We would probably make a stop in Taiwan, specifically Taipei, the capital, either on the way in or on the way out of the program. And so Taiwan is often overlooked by a lot of people because, you know, when we think about Taiwan, we often think about, you know, electronic products that we look on the back and it says made in Taiwan. We think about it as a very industrial place. But Taiwan has incredible scenery and an amazing culture to it. And Taipei as a city, I think, is probably poised to take over some of the role of Hong Kong, given the political challenges that they're facing there. And we have, not to mention, we have great air connections on EVA Air from Toronto and Vancouver directly to Taipei. So spending 5 nights there, we could really get a sense of what Taiwan is all about. So certainly Taipei in and of itself, a very modern city with skyscrapers, and Taipei 101, which is sort of their version of the CN Tower. It was at one time the highest building in the world. The Chiang Kai-shek Memorial that you can see in the photograph here. But you can travel in an easy day trip outside and visit Taroko National Park with its 1,000-meter high cliffs that are absolutely breathtaking, and you'll completely forget that you're in Taiwan. We'll probably also visit either Kaohsiung or Taichung, which are 2 of the other cities on the island of Taiwan, all of which very easily reached by an incredible high-speed rail network where you can get from Taipei to all the way to Kaohsiung in like an hour and a half. Joel will correct me if I got my numbers right. So you can see a lot of this country by staying right in the middle of Taipei. And again, a very walkable place, a great place to just take it all in, and an ideal last stop on our tour around Asia. So that gives you a sense of what our 5x5 program is all about. We've got a poll now for you. And so again, really important to get your feedback. If you were going to go to Asia, how long would you go for? And when you think about this question, you can obviously think about current affairs, what's happening with the coronavirus and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously it's a little bit difficult to look past that. But what we find is that the biggest question that people have about Asia, or the biggest issue they have, is that it's a long way to get, particularly if you're traveling from the East Coast. It's a long trip. So would you go for a longer period of time, knowing that the itinerary is slower paced? Fran asked what time of the year you're considering. We would likely go in the period of probably February, March, April. The reason being, and again, I say that because some parts of the itinerary, like Laos and Vietnam, they have winter. It's cool there in the north parts of those countries. So we want to be at a time when the weather there is not too cool. I mean, they don't get tons of snow or anything like that, but it is a little cooler than we might like. But at the same time, Southeast Asia gets very hot in the summertime. So when you get to, for example, Thailand, in southern Thailand in April is the hottest month of the year, and that's not as comfortable. So probably, February, March, we might change things around a little bit. But I think that Southeast Asia is best in our winter, because that's when you generally get the most sunshine, dry weather, and warm temperatures. That's what you'll find there. So back to the question, how long would you go for to Southeast Asia? Would you go up to 2 weeks? Would you go for 3 or 4 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks? Or would you considering doing everything that we talked about tonight, which if you added all of these cities together, if you did one huge long program, I think it works out to 55 nights. So almost 2 months on the road. We're not holding you to this. We're just trying to get an idea of what is the optimal duration. We might break this program into 2 trips. We might have 2 5x5s where we do 5 cities on one and 5 on the other. We might do it all as one, and then again, people can join and depart from wherever they want. But the better sense that we get for where people would like to go is how we're going to structure the trips. Mary asked a good question about vaccinations. Vaccination is something that we have to be careful. I'm not really allowed to give advice on that. There are some countries for which they recommend some vaccinations. And so you should look into that. Personally, I don't take any vaccinations in this part of the world. I don't know of any compelling reason, but you have to consult with your own physician about that. Visas are needed for some countries, but for the most part, they are either e-visas or visa on arrival. So Vietnam, Cambodia, you can literally get the visa when you show up, or you can go onto the computer and fill out a form and get it in advance. None of the countries that we're proposing is there an onerous visa process required. So as Paula mentions here, so it's quite easy to arrange. Good. So questions, any other questions that you have? So travel time from Toronto, Fran asked. So again, if you fly, for example, our recommended gateway would probably be, when I say gateway, the first city that you fly to, because you can't fly direct from Canada to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, frankly, to any of these countries. You have to fly first to either Japan or Taiwan or Hong Kong are the most common ones. So the flight from Toronto to Taipei, for example, which is nonstop, is approximately 14 hours. Hong Kong is roughly the same. It's maybe 15. Japan, Tokyo is a little bit less, but it's one long leg from Toronto to those cities. Vancouver, obviously a little bit less, but still probably about from Vancouver to Taipei, Joel will know better than me probably, but it's about 12 hours, 11 and a half to 12 hours. And then from there, then it's basically like a domestic flight. So from Taipei, for example, to Ho Chi Minh City is quick. It's about an hour and a half flight. It's pretty fast. So once you're there, the local flights are shorter. Of course, Singapore and Bali are further down to the south. So from Taipei, you're looking at more like a 4 to 4.5 hour flight. The long haul is getting across the Pacific. Deb asked about using English in these places. So here's the thing. In the touristy parts that you go, in the hotel, and you know, in the more sort of popular areas, people will speak English to a greater or a lesser degree. When you're traveling with us, with the bigger group, and when I say bigger group, it might be 16, 18, 20 people at the most, we'll always have a guide who can translate for us. But otherwise, what's very interesting is if you go to a place like Siem Reap in Cambodia, Cambodia made a wise decision after they got rid of all the Khmer Rouge and all the rest of it. They introduced English at an early age, and it's amazing. In Cambodia, you have almost no language problems. Thailand, on the other hand, although a big tourist destination, if you get to these smaller villages and so on and so forth, yeah, it's a bit of a struggle. But menus are almost always written in English. There's always a way to get around, and so we try to lead you in that direction. Good, yeah. Thank you. Stephanie mentioned that there's no other company like this. Well, we try to be a little bit different and innovative. That's the idea here. So we had a question about the weather. Yes, I see a question here. What currencies are used? Well, each one of these countries, so it's not Europe, we don't have one currency. So there's a different currency in every country. So yes, you do there's a lot of currency changing that has to be done. But what we typically do on our trips, for those of you who've been along before, is that the host will always have a float of money, of local currency. And so if you need to buy that little trinket in the market or a postcard, or you need to grab a coffee and you don't happen to have local change, then we'll facilitate that for you and keep a note of it. It's just one of the things that we do, so you don't constantly have to be worrying about, in this case, 6 different currencies. Jean asked, are we accepting bookings yet? No. So the idea behind this future travel forum is really, it's a forum to present an idea, to get your feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to see? How long do you want to go for? This is what we're interested to find out from you. The plan now is, as with our other 5x5 programs, which were also well received, and if you didn't get a chance to see those, you can get the webinar replay just by dropping us a note, and we'll send that off to you. We hope to develop these over the course of before the end of the year. We are looking forward to 2022 because it's not looking like travel in the next 6 months is going to be realistic. So we're our travel programs starting again in spring of 2021, and these programs we're looking at for 2022. So don't worry. The moment that we can, get it off to you, we will certainly do so. Good. I think there aren't any other questions, and look at that. It's almost exactly 1 hour. And so please do let us know if you have any other questions. Oh, before I forget, yes, our next Future Travel Forum will be in 2 weeks' time, October the 8th, part 4. We're going to be looking at Central and Eastern Europe. So we're going to be looking at Austria, Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania and Bulgaria in that one. So I'm looking forward to that one. Thank you so much for attending today. There's a link there in the chat box if you'd like to sign up for that. We'll also post the link in our newsletter, as we always do. And of course, as I said, if you do have any questions about this program, any feedback at all, we'd love to hear from you. It's always a pleasure to get your emails. And I can't wait to travel again. I'm sure you're as excited as I am. The day will come. Let's just keep crossing our fingers that they work towards some solutions for us. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to seeing you all again, at least virtually, sometime soon.